All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Irrational Competence Podcast. We're talking college football. It's the off season. It's the goofy time of year, but there are teams on the move. Texas and Oklahoma paying $100 million to get out of last year of their Big 12 contract. They're moving to the SEC. UCLA and USC moving to the Big 10. But the man who will never move away from me, my co-host Fresh. Fresh, how you doing, buddy?
Well, as long as I can afford to stay in the area, I'll stay here. I'm doing great, Haps. Love talking college football, and this is actually the fun part. We're still not even at spring practice yet, but this is where schools and media deals and everything else in the behind the scenes starts really heating up.
Yeah, so I had to put this off a lot of times during the season. There are different people who would want to engage in this conversation while the games were happening. And I'd be like, I don't want to talk about conference realignment and expansion and all of that noise until we're outside of the season and there's not actual let's talk about the actual football. And then when we get to the off season, let's do these things here and talk about conference realignment. So Fresh, we're going to kind of tackle this differently. I know there's a bunch of stuff out there. We're trying to kind of comb through, see what is legit, what isn't legit. But at the end of the day, this comes down to media right deal and how much different companies are going to pay to broadcast the games on their local networks.
Well, I mean, right? The first story I see today is Apple TV is the front runner right now for any broadcast rights for the Pac-12 going forward. And a couple of weeks ago, we saw a couple of networks, Turner Sports being one of them, backing out and walking away from the Pac-12 and not wanting to be interested. It kind of makes you wonder, after we saw the NBC, CBS, Fox deal with the BIG10 and ACC being a little bit involved there, and then definitely the Big 12, and then the SEC and ACC being heavily involved with ESPN and ABC, kind of left the Pac-12 out in the wind. And with USC and UCLA leaving, they've lost their two biggest draws for media markets and for just fan bases in general. And it kind of really it shows you that the strings are really being pulled by the media giants on television, online streaming, who's going to represent and broadcast these games and bring in that revenue for these programs and these universities. And that's the real trigger when it comes to this movement of conferences and moving around schools. And when you start hearing that Apple TV is the only front runner right now, it's kind of weird. You still have to put yourself in the position of no regular broadcast network truly wants to step up and be the owners of a conference, a quote unquote, a premier conference's football games, much less any other sport. I know we're in the age of all, Amazon Prime doing the Thursday night game for the NFL and Peacock doing Premier League soccer games and all other stuff, but this is still supposed to be a premier sport for your conference, and you're giving it off to Apple TV, which not everybody has, so you can't guarantee you're going to get that much, and you're really banking it off of subscriptions and advertising you're selling on your spaces, which is kind of risky for trying to sell football and brand yourself as being not Pac-12 after dark. So interesting road we're going down here in 2023.
Yeah, Fresh. So let's kind of roll through our media deals that are in place right now. So some of these are about ready to expire, but so we're giving you the future media deals that are going to come into play here. So like the Big 10 and I believe the SEC all expire next year in 24, if I'm correct. The ACC's media deal is still in place right now. That's going to run to 35-36. They are paying the ACC $240 million a year. The Big 10 signed a 7-year, $7 billion media deal. That one would end in 29-30. Fresh, I got the SEC. That one is for 10 years. I'm seeing $300 million a year, but every report I've seen also says that number is low once Texas and Oklahoma truly join the fray. So there's not a grand total in that one. The Big 12 just signed a new media deal recently. They're the most recent team to join or recent conference to finalize their deal. Their deal runs till 30-31, and that's worth $2.2 billion. And just like you alluded to, Fresh, Pac-12, no media deal after the 24 season.
It's just kind of it's a head scratcher, but it really, when you take your anchor schools out of the situation, your brands. I don't care, Oregon, Arizona, Arizona State, Stanford, Cal. You guys can say what you want, but you're not the brand of the Pac-12. You never have been. You've been there with USC and UCLA. They're in LA. They have the storied programs. They have the Coliseum and the Rose Bowl. They are the anchors. And with them leaving, it's kind of left a void out there on the West Coast. You looked at what happened the Big 12, where that kind of started it off. The Big 12 survived the initial with way back when Nebraska left and when A&M left, Missouri left, and Colorado. They all dispersed. Everyone's like, how are they going to survive? They narrowed it down. They buttoned down the hatches, and they really relied on great athletic programs that they had, but Texas and Oklahoma carried them. Then when Texas and Oklahoma left, they were like, well, we just lost our cattle. We lost our two bell cows. And, I mean, they desperately made a move to bring in BYU, UCF, Cincinnati, Houston, which doesn't scream Texas, Oklahoma. They aren't anchors, but they kind of try to save face and keep the league going. The Pac-12, where are you going to go to save your league? That's what the media markets are also looking at. Like, you can't keep your league surviving. What media markets can you attach? All you really have out there is some Mountain West fringe teams that you're not going to grab. That you already have the market. So that's what they're trying to figure out is you're already on the West Coast. You're not getting the majority of the viewers unless it's late at night, and there's no anchor schools. Other programs have been able to survive and use those anchors to get the eyes on the product, and that's going to really hurt the Pac-12. And it might actually be the demise of the conference because they just don't have that draw.
Yeah, and I think that Oregon wants to always pump their chest out and say we're the Nike school, and their founder came from Oregon. Okay, they're good. It just doesn't do something for me across the board. It doesn't really move the needle to me that much. Like if Oregon joins the Big 12, I think it maybe moves the needle a little bit more for them. But if, let's say, things get wild and Oregon joins the SEC or the Big 10, and I really just feel like, meh, like it's not like this huge monumental shift. Like you're saying, is getting USC and UCLA. That's a monumental shift. US or Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC, monumental shift right there. When you're looking at these things, that's really the question you got to ask yourself. And it goes beyond just like the idea of competitive balance. Like, don't think of this as just for football, because while football is the biggest generator for college athletics, there's big things. There's talk about Gonzaga right now joining the Big 12 for basketball only. While you can say what you want about everything else, Gonzaga does pull in quite a bit of money for their basketball program. Now, again, not going to hit the number football does, but it's not a chunk of change that me and you would be like, oh, okay, you want to hand me that? Well, yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah, and you kind of look at, you brought up earlier when Texas, Oklahoma left, and it's $100 million to bail out. Well, there was a pause. We all knew this was going to happen early anyway. But the reason why the pause was they were negotiating this contract and how much can we actually afford to pay out? What's going to be the buyout? And what's actually going to be our revenue? And it's not a coincidence that the day that they actually came to an agreement was the same day the SEC released their revenue, that every school got $49.5 million or something like that. And Texas and Oklahoma were like, all right, we each pay $100 million. In 2 years, we'll have made this money back in a heartbeat. We're going to move this thing up and generate the income quicker. And that's where it comes to. Where's my income flow? Where's my revenue? Where's my eyes on the product? And all sports. I think it's a great thing about all sports because USC, UCLA, baseball programs are solid. They're not going to be huge drawers, but they have a chance to win a national championship if they make it to Omaha. Their basketball programs are great. And now those teams, they're going to be in the Big 10. Texas, Oklahoma, great softball, great all-around program. Any athletic program at these those schools are fantastic. Now they're going from the Big 12 to the SEC, but more loaded programs and having a bigger base, more chances to play for a national championship. We don't know how things are going to go out and play out in the rest of the way in the grand scheme of college athletics, but they are strengthening their position to be in a spot to funnel toward playoff spots, toward titles, toward tournaments, and whatever the sport may be. And they know that conference is not going to be on the fringe of becoming a speck or disappearing overnight. Like the Pac-12 might die overnight, and would anyone really know? ACC is nicely entrenched. I think they have the East Coast. They're kind of built in there, and they can fringe into the middle of the country. The Big 10 now, basically, they're going to run from Rutgers in New Jersey all the way out to LA. They are a landscape of the country. the Southeastern Conference, they've pushed the boundaries of what is Southeast in the entire country. But the Pac-12, you're not going to get Hawaii. You're not bringing them in because that's more travel budget, costs that are going into you. I think actually they should have gone and got BYU first because that's a little more in the landscape of what they would be, and they could have built off of Colorado, Utah, a little fringe there. Because now you're also factoring in travel budgets, not just the money you're making off the TV deals. If these conferences start getting a little more than regionalized, you've got to have the finances in your department to fund sending a volleyball team across the country, or a soccer team, or a baseball team across the country. That's also what's coming into play here. It's not just football, because you mentioned all sports. It's everything. And where's that financial revenue coming in from tickets, from product being sold, and media revenue that can allow these teams, these athletes, to have a modern support system and be able to play at a peak level?
Yeah, so let's do that's the all the boring stuff there, fresh as we're talking about it. Although it's the stuff you need to pay attention to, because if you don't understand that aspect of it, then moving teams to different conferences, just you're breathing hot, you're sending out hot air and just flapping your gums on stuff that maybe isn't as relevant that you into other areas with this conference realignment here. So let's go through the conferences here, fresh. And we talked off air a little bit. There's all of this talk about going to like 20 team super conferences. I think me and you both agree, and again, correct me if I'm wrong on this, that I don't necessarily see 20 teams. I think 20 teams, that means if we go to 4 team conferences, that's 80 teams that we have to account for. There aren't 80 teams in the current Power 5 structure. That means you have to start adding schools from non-Power 5 areas. And then it's kind of this whole domino effect. I think 16, 18 teams are much more realistic. You see the Big 10 and the SEC will be at 16 teams here in a year from now, right now. So what say you? Where are we going along this one before we do each conference?
Well, I kind of did a breakdown. I looked at the ACC, Big 10, Big 12, ACC, and Pac 12 all staying at 16 teams. And that's a little more doable based on regional areas and current rivalries and something like that. But like we've been talking about, if the Pac 12 just can't survive after the loss and they have to start scrambling, does we do kind of shrink into a 4 team Super League? And that's the real kicker there, because then that's where you start seeing all the realignment things outside of Texas, Oklahoma, and USC, USLA. Everything else is just up in an air. And it doesn't matter if you just move the conference this year, but like you said, you're starting to bring in Conference USA teams potentially, or AAC teams jumping up into plugging holes, and you're adding a Tulane in the SEC because you have to find the 16th team, or Memphis or something like that. That you want to keep it regional. You bring them in for baseball and basketball or some other sports, but football they're probably not going to do much good. It becomes a struggle where it maybe solidifying the conference forever, but then all these small conferences they're going to keep filling their ranks. So now you're going to start seeing the Sun Belt going into FCS and pulling up, teams that were 1AA for the past 60 years are now getting moved up into Division I football. And their chances this is the other problem you run into. And App State and Georgia Southern, I think, were great examples of it in the past 15 years, where they were playing for and winning FCS national championships, and they were in the playoffs every year. They both make the jump up to the Sun Belt. Yeah, you get some money, you get to go to a bowl game, the Bahamas Bowl or the Myrtle Beach Bowl or whatever. But now you're saying you're FBS. What are you actually competing for? You made the jump up a level, but you can't win a national championship. There's no way you're winning a national title ever again. And that's where you also, if you're that program, you have to make that decision of, do I want to play FCS football and potentially win a championship, or plug a hole at the very bottom of FBS and go off to some scrum bowl on the 18th of December and be cannon fodder 1 or 2 weeks out of the year for a bigger program? That's also what comes into play here. I think the 5 conferences at 16 teams is the most stable. It allows less picking up of the mid-tier group of 5 programs, and it keeps the stability, keeps the conference platform in there. And I think it's easier to navigate going forward. The 20 would be, you kind of already have had a playoffs point at that point. You might as well have already said, this is our round of 32, a round of 64 in the regular season, and then your playoffs are already half done by the time the end of the season comes. I think The 5 at 16 keeps it at most balanced right now. Scared to see what 20 would be. It could get messy, and people would be like, "Why is that team playing up at this level? They don't qualify, or they shouldn't even be there." Like a Liberty, but that's what you have to start doing. You're pulling from the pulling the best of what's left to plug a hole.
Right. And as we kind of go through this here, Fresh, I did this about a month ago where I kind of did a projection, like if we did go to 420 team conferences, like who would we be adding in there? And both of us talked about in the ACC, we would probably have to add Army Navy into the ACC. And do we feel like Army and Navy can recruit with their requirements to be competitive in the ACC? And the answer was no. It'd be a nice story. And, every couple of years, yeah, Army would be 7-5 in this year, and Navy would be 2-11 or 3-9, whatever. It's a delicate balance too, because we can't go too far one way and we can't go too far, if, like you were saying, in that 20 team model, and then we're starting to ruin what makes college football special. And we also kind of have to evolve with the times too, because they're changing quite a bit, and at a rapid pace here, because of the finances that are going more into college athletics here. So let's just kind of start moving through here. We're going to, let's say we're moving to, you want to do 5 16 team leagues?
Let's roll with the 516 for right now.
All right. So by going 5-16s, we know that the Big 10 and the SEC would be done, right? After 24?
Yes, because after you had Texas, Oklahoma, and USC, UCLA, they would all be locked in at 16.
Okay. So both of those conferences would be locked in at 16. Let's just do this real quick hypothetically. If you are the brand new Big 10 commissioner and you want to go to 18, who would you add?
If I was going to go to 18, I'd make a real strong look at Pitt because you already have Penn State, um, and pull them from the ACC. And either Iowa State or Cincinnati would be on my radar, and West Virginia would also be on my radar, just because it keeps you in the regional area. And actually, a point that brings in here because the Big Ten has standards for academics to be involved, and Nebraska had to go through a whole rigor to meet it during the initial period. They've dropped below that now, but since they were already in, they met to join. You really can't keep those standards going much more if you want to keep at 18 or 20. You've got to have a little lightened up because you're going to pick a school millions of miles away that's going to not make it's not going to make much sense. You can try to keep it, but that's going to be pretty difficult. You're not going to have a USC or UCLA to afford that budget to travel, across the country. So that's where they might have to lighten up some of those, standards. If they don't, it's going to be tough to find that next school. But I think Iowa State would be interesting, keeping them in the same area. You also build that Iowa State, Nebraska, USC, UCLA kind of bridge out to the west and maybe shorten some of that travel. Pitt there with Penn State in the state. You also West Virginia. You sort of loop them together, and then Cincinnati, obviously, at Ohio. Those would be the teams I would sort of look at initially. Louisville would be an interesting one as well, right there on the fringe. But that's the kind of group of teams I would try to look at for my last two spots.
To me, I'm going out west. I'd be more a West Coast person. Uh, Again, Big Ten to me is all about their media markets. And there's one market out there on the West Coast that's still kind of hanging out there. It's the seventh largest media market in the country, and that's the San Francisco market. I'd be looking at a Cal Berkeley or Stanford, both of them. And the accreditation you're thinking of is the AAU accreditation, Fresh. Both UCLA and USC do have that accreditation coming in. Berkeley would be interesting because of the connection that they have with UCLA and what UCLA had to do for Cal to leave the Pac-12 and to go out there into the Big Ten. So I think Cal makes a lot of sense in that regard. I also think Stanford could make a lot of sense as well. There's always going to be talk about Oregon has the AAU accreditation out there. That's really it. Washington does not, which I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh, Washington. I don't think that Seattle market is really in play for them. I could see them going for something like maybe if they really wanted to be interesting, Colorado, especially with Coach Prom. I think Colorado becomes a more attractive team. And then Arizona, both of them have that AAU accreditation out there. So there's only 63 universities in the United States and 2 of them that are in Canada as well.
I think that Stanford Cal would be the best option then because you want to bring pairs in their tradition. It's a rivalry. It also builds that West Coast and that California. Because if Washington was also, I think the Oregon Washington would be interesting, but Cal Stanford, that kind of makes perfect sense right there.
All right, Fresh. So let's go down to SEC then. They're at 16 as well. Let's do the same rigmarole with them. If you have to add 2 teams, who's the SEC wanting to pick up the last 2? I know one I would probably say, but I don't think they're getting out of that ACC deal.
And when it comes to money, like you said, Texas, Oklahoma, they paid their money. SEC is not going to care. They're going to go get Florida State and Clemson.
Okay. I could see Georgia Tech. I could see Georgia Tech going over there just because correct me if I'm wrong, Georgia Tech was in the SEC at one point.
They were a charter member, yep.
They could be like, you're coming home and bring in Georgia Tech. And then I think Florida State makes way more sense than Miami is in my eyes.
Miami wouldn't fit. I think Clemson's an easy fit there. Georgia Tech's interesting, but from their brand and athletics and their academic standards, they want to have to compete at a higher level. When you have Auburn, Georgia, Alabama, and then if Florida State comes all within 4.5 hours max drive, and even Tennessee's probably 4 hours away. That's a tough sell for them to be in the middle of all of it.
Yeah, but Vanderbilt needs some competition.
Vanderbilt's there for baseball.
Yeah. All right, so that's really, I would say Georgia Tech. Me, I'm Florida State with that as well. All right, so let's go outside of the 2 big boys out there. Let's go the ACC, man. ACC, interesting thing. They have the longest media right deal. As I was telling you before we started recording Fresh, there's some interesting language in this ACC media rights deal. Basically, what it says that if you are a university in the ACC and you were to leave the conference, you would not only forego all of your money that you would get within the deal, but any future money that any other TV deal gets you until 2036. So if I'm getting paid by Fox the following year, and basically what this is doing, as you told me, it's a good way to prevent someone going to the BIG10 or to the BIG12, depending on who they have in their media deal. But let's say this: ACC is currently sitting at, what are they sitting at right now? They are up to
12.
They're 12. So they need to add 14. I'm sorry, they have they're at 14.
They're 14. They need to get 2 more to get 16.
Okay, they're at 14. Who's ACC adding?
I'm saying they're adding UConn, Notre Dame.
Okay.
This is kind of how I broke it down. I put them into 4 pods, and you kind of build it in their own regional aspect, where you have BC, Syracuse, Notre Dame, and UConn up there in one little pod. You have UNC, Duke, NC State, Wake Forest in the next pod. Miami, Florida State, Georgia Tech, Clemson in the 3rd pod, and then the 4th is Virginia, Virginia Tech, Louisville, Pitt. You keep them for football pods, but you can use them for all sports, but it kind of regionalizes it because they are heavy in that. They do have a lot of heavy academic institutions. You kind of have a balance there. And UConn brings them a significant basketball presence. It brings them a decent baseball presence, and their football team under Coach Mora just had a decent year last year. You might be able to rebuild, and some of that money being in a bigger conference might help them actually attract and build more football in the Northeast. And Notre Dame is a national brand. They already basically play 6 games, but this would actually give them the full-on, legit in all sports, and we kind of lock it down to be it makes too much sense in that perspective. You have both teams right now are independents. They're not leaving any league, and they could join. You punch them in, you lock down your 16 total.
Yeah, I think Notre Dame is definitely the first and foremost target for the ACC. I think they make a lot of sense for the ACC there. If not Notre Dame, to me, I started asking myself the question. I do like the UConn. I didn't think about UConn actually. I really do like that addition there, Fresh. But for me, I was going. If I'm the ACC, my everything is centered out of North Carolina and kind of spreads out from there. I'm thinking about locking down the entire state of North Carolina. Like North Carolina is my state, and especially when it comes to travel, is one of the things you said is a way to make travel very easy. A school like App State and ECU. I think both of those are respectable universities. ECU is a phenomenal research university as well. It would carry almost very. I don't know if it would carry the same weight as Duke and UNC for the research ability, but maybe just a step below that. So it would be somewhere where they would be able to have like a prestigious level within adding ECU. I have a lot of respect for that university, but also keeping that, keeping everything in close proximity, that you're no more than an 8-hour drive from anywhere within the ACC. So if you added App State and ECU, it would keep you very regionalized and keep those travel costs way down.
Yeah, I mean, when I mocked up the 420 teams and the ACC, ECU is a definite lock in that same bracket with the Duke, Carolina, NC State, Wake, because I mean they're all within 3.5, 4 hours of each other. When it comes to football, they all can compete. Basketball, it's up and down, but baseball, that'd be also a great conference. It really brings stability to the entire state and really make them all compete against each other, which would be a lot of fun.
Let me throw this out at you, Fresh. What would you think about Liberty joining the ACC? Are you yay, nay?
They would in my mock-up. They were the last team of the 20, and I put them in the region with Virginia, Virginia Tech. I'm not going to spill the details because I'm writing an article on all of it. But put them in that regional area where it helps them build. They are that lower team, and there's really no harm because what's different from them compared to a UConn or a BC where they're in the institution, they're plugging a hole. They're a Vanderbilt, they're another institution in that league, and they have money behind them to build. That stadium's full. They can sell media rights there, and they have donors giving tons of cash. So eventually, it will build and get themselves up to speed. But putting in a region where it's close to Virginia, Virginia Tech, and that west part of Virginia, it would be a nice little niche fit.
Yeah, I think Liberty would be an interesting one. It would do the exact same thing as ECU and App State, keeping travel really contained over there. But other than that, I think that it's very limited what the ACC is able to do. What the ACC needs more than anything else, and this has been said by multiple people out there, ACC needs Florida State and Miami to return back to Florida State and Miami more than anything else. Because if those two universities start really, consistently winning back to what we're used to from the 90s, all of a sudden, Florida State baseball goes back to being an elite level program. It's still a pretty good program, but not to what Florida State baseball used to be top notch. Miami's basketball program has gotten better over the years. They've kind of been up and down lately, but they've been better over the years. It would, if those two schools came back, and then you had them, you have Clemson in there, you have UNC and Duke in there for basketball. Um, Virginia Tech comes back to what they're supposed to be, and sad for that fan base. All of a sudden, the ACC becomes a much more attractive conference in there, but it really requires those schools to start pulling their weight within the conference.
Yeah, and with the ACC, I think they understand that they have their power horses for football, but they also have they have a great depth in basketball, which is underperforming this year as a overhaul. But they also have solid women's sports across the board, and then baseball, their perennial team sending them off to the World Series. So if they can find a top to bottom, well depth related conference, build, that's what helps them be 365 notoriety. You're always in front of a TV camera. You're always getting your logo put up on SportsCenter or whatever the news channel is, and that's what helps also drive this initiative. Is how many times can I get my school's logos in front of somebody's eyes?
Yeah, and it's interesting how we change things with basketball compared to football. We look at a ACC basketball team and we're saying, "Oh yeah, well they're down this year overall." Except in football, we'd say, "Oh, this is a really tough conference from top to bottom." Because you go back and take a look at this. Look at the Final Four from last year. You had Duke and UNC meet for the first time in the Final Four. Very interesting there, because I really, really think that that's a great conference there. You take a look, Miami made the Elite Eight, so you had 3 teams from the ACC last year make the Elite Eight. So
And
interesting.
quiet. It was quiet too, which also is surprising.
Yeah. All right, Fresh, let's go all the way out to the Big 12. They've been the most movers and shakers. I think they're going to be the most active team here. They only have 12 members after Texas and Oklahoma leave. So we got to add 4 teams to them. Who are you adding to the Big 12?
Well, this was interesting because initially I was kind of mad at them, like, why'd you go get BYU? Why'd you go get Houston? Cincinnati, UCF. It didn't fit any of like the mantra of the Big 12 of being the middle of the Midwest of the country. BYU is kind of way out in the stretch, like they don't even feel there, whatever. And obviously, we call it, the people are calling it the University of Disney World now, on the Big 12 chat boards. So I find it's pretty funny. Outside of them, I think they also need to come back and get some of their own regionalized ties and bring up some of those AAC programs that have been continuing to produce, which also will make the transition for the UCFs to Houston and Cincinnati a little bit easier, because coming in, if Texas and Oklahoma are still on the schedule, do I really expect Cincinnati football after losing Luke Fickell, or UCF right now to compete with the Texas Oklahoma going into Austin or Norman and being able to win a title if those schedules were supposed to stay, or even for next year alone? It's getting kind of tough. You've got to find some balance across the board. And that's why I looked at SMU. You already have a strong Texas base. SMU's been fighting for it. You put them in the spotlight now. You build the Baylor rivalry. You really add more to the Houston rivalry, more to the TCU rivalry. You get SMU play Texas Tech. It really builds off that and thrives off of that. You go grab Tulsa keep them in Tulsa and Oklahoma State now can have a little thing going on there. Go grab Memphis. They're right there on the fringe. It kind of helps a little bit in between for Cincinnati and for UCF on that eastern edge of the league. And then the fourth one I kind of debated. It came up to me, did I want to have the rash decision and maybe the recency bias of Tulane after 1 year in football team, and the rest of the programs were or do I look at how can I pair UCF in Florida with another school that needs some help? And how can we help maybe add Florida more eyes in Florida into their media deal for the Big 12? And I kind of debated Tulane or USF. Thinking all sports, not just football. USF's building a brand new football facility, their own on-site football stadium, trying to pump some more money into the program. Which one paid more dividends? And I figured USF, you pair the UCF-USF rivalry, keep that going. You get the eyes in the media areas in Florida into the Big 12. You keep yourself involved. You put BYU on one end, UCF and USF on the other. You kind of you kind of widen out your range of your 16 teams, and you kind of use that southern, southeast, southwest, belly to really help, cultivate the market. But I think that's where I kind of went with those additional 4 teams.
So this one was tough for me because, like you said, in the Big 12, you have West Virginia sitting out there, or all as far out east in the conference. You have UCF now down in Florida, and then you have BYU all the way out in Utah. Fresh, I was kind of all over the place with this one. I had every team that you said. I was talking about trying to talk myself into Rice. I was trying to talk myself into North Texas, the Mean Green. And I'm going to kind of go back to a few things here. So, I think that you're right where you kind of have to regionalize yourself and add something in there. So I think that you need to kind of segue the difference first from UCF in towards the middle of the country there. I think adding a school like USF would be phenomenal for them. I think that the Bulls and the Tampa market would be great. So I would agree with you on USF. SMU just makes way too much sense to me. I don't know why that hasn't happened. That just makes way too much sense. They have such a rich history, and you leave Texas and having all this money in the organization. But then you bring in a program like SMU that has a boatload of cash as well. I would go with SMU. I would definitely bring SMU in. The West Virginia Cincinnati thing, I'm bringing in Marshall. I think Marshall then gets very competitive with West Virginia, Cincinnati, and in that area, and maybe bring in a school like maybe a Memphis or a Tulane, or maybe even like a Louisiana Tech, someone like them. And so somewhere to kind of pin another school in that track as well. So you kind of make that conference a little more cohesive. because the travel costs for UCF and BYU are going to be ridiculous, and West Virginia.
Yeah, it's insane. That's kind of what, even when the whole thing happened, I was like, I wasn't thinking football as much, but imagine your UCF women's soccer team. You have to go play in Provo, Utah. To get all the girls on a flight, fly them all the way half across the country, get there 2 days early, the room, the board, all of it, and then fly them back. That's ridiculous. And that's kind of where they've got to be able to cultivate as many opportunities as they can to bring in the cash flow. We kept talking about Texas. I think it's a very Texas heavy, group here. UTSA could also be a silent one that could sneaky fit in there. It's San Antonio. It's a big market, and the football team has done well the past 2 years to help build the brand. Could they be that next school in Texas to really join the fray? The Big 12 becomes Texas centered and then builds out from there on the fringes.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that one a lot. I didn't even think UTSA. That's a good one. All right, Fresh. The toughest one. Pac-12. Down to 10 teams. We got to add 6 teams to the Pac-12. Okay. Jumping off the top, we're going Boise State, Fresno State, Nevada, and San Diego State, probably. Those 4 at least. Do you have those 4 with me?
I'm locked in with those 4. Now, I know we just talked about the Big 12 in BYU. I kind of I made up a mock-up where they basically said, we're going to pay our buyout from the Big 12. And now that everything has sort of happened, we're going to give the Big 12 money. And as we're BYU, we are going to go to the Pac-12. And we are going to be lumped in. And like I have like in the 4 pods, I brought up, we got an Oregon, Washington State, Oregon State pod. That makes too much sense to have the 4 of them grouped together. That's a done deal. But then BYU pays to go over to the Pac-12, and you have a Utah, Colorado, BYU, Boise State bucket. You already took Stanford and Cal, but in this case, I'm going to leave Stanford and Cal. And this is where it starts getting messy. Do you put Arizona State with Stanford and Cal? That doesn't really make much sense. They're so far away. But then what teams from the Mountain West do you go and grab? Do you plug a San Diego State and a Fresno State right there with Stanford and Cal, or do you put them down with Arizona State? It's weird. You could put in Fresno State, San Jose State, Nevada, New Mexico plays the Arizona card right there next to them. There's a whole bunch of teams, but none of them feel like they should fit. It doesn't feel right to get them to 16. You sort of, at this point, you're throwing 4 teams out there from the Mountain West, and you're killing that league to plug holes in the Pac-12.
So, Fresh, there's one that kind of came to my mind. I think Boise State, Fresno, and San Diego State, all 3 of those make a lot of sense. And I think that the TV deal does get interesting at that point because Boise State, especially there, if you're talking about regions and markets there, you're going to pull in Idaho, Montana, North Dakota. That whole area is very interested in Boise State. And especially Boise State's now a Power 5 team. People will become more of a fan of that program. Fresno State makes much more sense, especially just because you're continuing to pick up the California area as well. And then same thing with San Diego. San Diego is a huge market. It does give you a chunk of the LA market, not a huge one. But San Diego State University is a fairly large university. So that will give you a good piece of the pie right there. I'm going to throw one at you here. And this is one that I think makes a lot of sense, but I think it makes a lot of sense for a variety of other reasons. And that's going to be the UNLV Running Rebels. I think UNLV actually would be an amazing fit for the Pac-12 just because of everything that's going on in Vegas right now. Vegas just got an NFL franchise. So now all of a sudden you have college sports on Saturday in Las Vegas. You have Sunday football in NFL football in Las Vegas or Monday night football in Las Vegas. And then you got Vegas in general. Vegas is about 700,000 people in there, 650, 700,000, depending on what you're looking at. Vegas just becomes this interesting place now. And there's even rumors that Vegas is in the market for another pro sports franchise there. The NBA already holds their summer league out there. Vegas is getting real interesting.
UNLV already plays their home games in Allegiant Stadium, so you're not having to build a new stadium. You already have the dome there. Um, Now, if they're elevated to the Pac-12, it means you have to hope that's going to elevate recruiting. And if you looked at anything in recruiting at all, there's a lot of talent coming from that Henderson, Vegas area. Bishop Gorman High School puts out tons of products. You keep the kids home, you build the product. I think right now, part of the UNLV appeal from football, the kids are like, you play in the Mountain West. Why would I want to stay home here when I can go to UCLA, USC, Oregon, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan? I could get out of Vegas because honestly, people who live in Vegas, they don't really like living in Vegas because they just work there and make tons of money. People want to get out. If you talk to any locals, they rarely go to the strip. They're like, I stay away from that area. But giving a chance of elevating that program to a whole new conference and now being a Power Five, that might keep them like, all right, now we're actually taking it seriously. Now we're going to make the next step. This is kind of where these smaller programs who are on that fringe, the conference now connected to it helps elevate that program and elevate all the programs because now the eye appeal of you're in the Pac-12, you're not in the Mountain West anymore. You're in the ACC, you're not in the Sun Belt anymore. You're not in the AAC anymore. Like that right there, taking that next step is kind of the big push, and that might be a nice little kick there for UNLV.
Absolutely. And again, you could throw in Utah State, or you're just going to raid the Mountain West, though.
And that's where you've got to make the right moves if you're doing it. Like those schools, it's got to be the right moves.
Yeah, I do like the Gonzaga thing going to the Big 12 for just basketball. I like that.
If you're making a move like this, you've got to think more than just basketball. Because honestly, this is me talking. I know we're in basketball season. What has Gonzaga ever done? They have not won a title. We've been hearing about Mark Few and Gonzaga for 25 years, and they don't win anything. They won, what, 2 Final Fours? Get out of here. I'm tired of hearing about it. Up in the middle of nowhere in Washington or Oregon, wherever they're from, they don't win. They're that annoying brand that went from being cute to now it's like we want you to lose.
Yeah. I don't feel that way about Gonzaga, but again, I haven't been burned by Gonzaga a bunch of times, so
I have.
you have.
I'm very jaded.
Yeah. It's interesting, you're fresh. Like, there's a lot of things that can happen. I think that it'll come down to if the Pac-12 survives. If the Pac-12 doesn't survive, this conversation is definitely going to change, and it's going to give us a lot to talk about because I think when things start happening, things are going to happen real fast. And I think we're going to see these colleges jump really quickly.
And you're going to start seeing crazy numbers of being thrown out there for media deals and this and that and revenues. At this point, we should stop being so shocked by it because we're seeing Daniel Jones asked for $45 million a year in his new deal. If he's going to get paid $45 million, anyone else getting any kind of money should never be a surprise for anyone else ever again. But part of this, because there's so much money, to keep the development of all the leagues going and keep other football and other sports happening, there's got to be the trickle down. You've got to have the constant flow of everything. And that's kind of where, when I looked at this also, I looked at how can we take 5 16-team leagues and having all of them have 4 groups, four pods of 4, and build out scheduling going forward. Number one, to strengthen everybody's conference scheduling and put in rules on how you actually do it. Every school has to have a 9-game conference schedule. You have to play everyone in your bucket, and then 2 from each on a rotating basis, home and away, going back and forth. But then you also have to play one other Power 5 team. You have to play one Group of 5 team, and you have to play an FCS opponent, and that FCS opponent cannot be played any later in the season than week 3. Now, the reason why I say the last 2 is the FCS opponent, they rely on these money games to keep their programs going. They can't really afford. They don't have the media deals. They don't have the donors giving millions of dollars. So you play one FCS game, maybe week 1 or week 3 or week 2, whatever. You get some guys some playing time. You get a win on your schedule. They get money for their budget. You're fine. The Group of 5 game, they're very similar. They don't have these huge media deals. You got to keep them going. You got to see their competition. It gives you a chance. You can play them whenever you want. But then from there on out, you got 10 games of Power 5 football. Number one, the TV teams, the TV deals, they're going to want to have the better games on TV. You put them later in the season, they mean more. So you regulate them. You take those FCS games, you throw them at the front where you mix them in, get them done early. But it forces good teams to play good teams, and you have solid depth in your schedules. And this is where strength of schedule now is really a little more even across the board. and you're going to start seeing opponents playing each other more consistently as well, especially in conference. I know right now, Texas A&M came to the SEC in 2011, I think, 2012. I can't remember off the top of my head. They've only played Georgia once, and that was in Athens. They are not scheduled to play in Kyle Field for the next 2 years. And you're figuring, you've been in the league for 13 years and have only played one time. The rotation of going home and away and playing teams like that, and it happens in all leagues, is not very common. You've got to up the increase of getting through everybody in the league, playing everywhere. And if you have this rotation, that means if you come in as a freshman and you leave as a senior in 4 years, you're going to play at every team in your league. You're going to play at home and away from a football perspective. And that just shows you've got to have all the opportunities on the platform, and everyone gets involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that too, because a lot of these cupcake scheduling games, especially late in the season, how many times do we see Alabama playing the Citadel or someone like that before the Iron Bowl?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Everyone's going to play an FCS opponent,
right?
But doing it in the first 3 weeks of the season, get it done in September, get it done early, and move on.
Yeah, right. And I get it, and you're taking advantage of the opportunity that you have, but come on, guys! Like, play those games early, get them out of the way, and alternate them too. Like, if we're doing this, is say that Big 12 is going to play their FCS opponent during week 1 and 2, and only during week 1 and 2, and then the Big 10 in their week 1 is going to play another Power 5 team. So you're alternating everyone who's going to play an FCS opponent. So you're not going to have this week 2 where there's no real good college football games on. So
yeah, I think this is where you have a commissioner, or even if it's the college football playoff committee and they have a commissioner like a czar, which we all heard this conversation. That's the kind of base rules where everyone wants. Nobody wants the dead weekends where there's nothing on. Like we're watching practice. Like it's not fun for anyone. It's not even fun for people going to the games because they're leaving in that for the first quarter. Mix it up, but get these meaningless games out of the way early and let you play through a solid schedule. Really test the true depth of your squad.
Yeah. All right, Fresh. Well, it's fun. It's going to give us a lot to talk about. I'm sure this is not going to be the last time that we talk about this stuff, but we'll see what happens in the next coming months, because UCLA and USC came out of left field last year.
That one snuck up. Give me two teams that you think would happen this summer, like something randomly, like a June afternoon. What two schools do you think would make a move?
I have a feeling. For some reason, I think that I don't know why I'm stuck on this. I'm stuck on that. I feel like the military academies are going to do something. I don't know why I feel that way too. And it could be a minor move for them. Like all three of the military academies joined the American, or all three of them joined the MAC or something like that. For some reason, I just keep feeling like that the military academies have to do something, especially maybe Army and Navy being independent. I feel like or Air Force.
Navy's in the AAC. Army's the only one independent. You're good though.
Yeah. So maybe Army doing something, that would be one that I really feel like. And again, I'll go back to this App State. Again, another school that I feel like is growing themselves pretty quickly, becoming a bigger and bigger school. I could see App State or ECU really making some noise. For some reason, I keep going back to the state of North Carolina. And again, I don't know why. I guess it just kind of makes sense to me. But I really did like your USF one. I think USF is definitely another team to watch out there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're in Florida. We start seeing some of that pop up more. Coach Paul McCord is actually a women's lacrosse coach for the new starting program there. So get a little more eyes on that, a little more info. But you start seeing the developments, the renderings, the building of the indoor practice facility being used for lacrosse and football, the construction, the renderings on a on-campus facility, football-wise and lacrosse-wise, and building a full brand of having it right there. Because I've seen games where they play down at Raymond James Stadium, and it's an NFL stadium, it's a Buck Stadium. It doesn't feel like a home facility, but you start getting your own on-site facility. The students easier to get there. The fans build it. The alumni come back. You make it your own, and it becomes an environment. And that's what helps build a program. Look what UCF did. UCF used to play downtown Orlando for years. Team struggled, really not really making much of a wave. They put money into it. They built the bounce house on campus. They got it built. The place has been rocking, and the team eventually built from there. The program's now become the standard. You have to have that on-campus facility, and you have a chance to build it and grow from there is great. I think that's what USF's trying to follow that same path, and they could benefit from it across the board.
All right, Fresh, I got one last thing to leave you with. You guys could be listening to this episode wherever, however long, before or after. We're recording this in the end of February here. This Saturday will be February 25th. Why is that significant, Fresh, for college football?
First ever football game played?
Nope. It is exactly one half of the year till our first weekend of college football. There are 52 weeks in the year. We are 26 weeks away till the first set of kickoffs for the 2023 season.
Hey, that's better. 26 is better than 52.
It is much better. All right, guys, you've been listening to another episode of the Irrational Confidence Podcast. We're part of Spinnable Sports, so make sure you go to spinnablesports.com. Yes, that is spinnablesports.com. There's a bunch of new articles up and available there. We're going to be diving deep into college basketball very shortly here. We'll be taking a look at all of the teams. We'll be breaking down the brackets, giving our picks. Make sure you're following us on Twitter. Get involved in the hostile takeover that we're going to be running for the second straight year. Free contest for any of those who wish to join us. Special thanks to our producer, Drew. Without him, none of this is all possible. So want to give him a shout out. And like, subscribe wherever you get your podcast from, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Good Pod, Stitcher, I don't know. Like, subscribe wherever you get them. If you're watching this on the YouTube, subscribe to that Spinnable Sports channel. Hit that notification bell. Get notified every single time we drop a new episode. And without any of this stuff, none of this would be possible, Fresh. But this is the year. This is going to be a big year for us here, Fresh. I'm excited.
This the year you win the hostile takeover?
I've won before.
Really?
Yeah, I won. First year,
I guess I was so mad I just ignored it.
Yeah, first year I didn't win. The only time I have not run the hostile takeover, I won the hostile takeover.
So you're saying you're actually jinxing yourself by taking control?
No, I think I've won money other ways, but I don't think I've won it outright before when I run it. But maybe I did. I'd have to go back and look.
I just can't wait for none of my teams to cover on the opening Thursday and be knocked out before Saturday morning.
It's the worst thing in the world, man. Getting pissed. Yep. But I got something to tell you off air. So.
Well, with that, thanks everybody. Talk to y'all later. Bye, y'all.